All right, today is day 21 of Bible in 90 Days, or What's in the Bible, where we're reading through the entire Bible just to get a summary of what the entire Bible talks about: the Old Testament, the New Testament, stories about the Israelites, about Jesus, about creation, about the judges, about the kings, about the priests, about the missionaries and everything that happened in the Bible. So we're working our way slowly from the Old Testament all the way into the New Testament. So at the moment, we're in the book of 1 Samuel, which is going to be followed by 2 Samuel. And as I said yesterday, we're now in a period where we're beginning to see the different kings that ruled over Israel, and how they were selected, and how they were helped, and how their stories ultimately shaped the history of Israel. So yesterday, as we're saying, Saul was the first king of Israel, but now, because of his disobedience, God had told him that that kingdom would be taken away from him and it would be given to somebody else. And today we get to hear more about who that person might be, and how their story shapes out, and the relationship between that person and Saul. So 1 Samuel chapter 16, Samuel is sent to Jesse's house to anoint a new king, because God told him that's where the new king was coming from. Samuel was told that God does not look at outward appearances, but really the heart, because I suppose Saul was a very handsome and tall, and he looked different to all the other Israelites. So maybe Samuel was in that mindset, but he's told at this point that God is not looking at that. He's looking at the heart. All of Jesse's sons pass through, Samuel saying, "Is this the one? Is this the one? Is this the one?" But God says no to all of them. But there was one person that was actually missing, who is actually called David. So they call David, and God says, yes, this is the guy. So David is actually anointed the next king of Israel, at this point. We then pan back to Saul, who is the current king at this time. It says that an evil spirit that was sent by God torments him, and the only way he could get better was if somebody was playing music for him. Lo and behold, it's actually David who is selected, to play music for him and make him feel better. 1 Samuel 17, we get the famous story of David and Goliath. Goliath was a Philistine who said, instead of a war between Israel and Philistines, because remember, the Philistines, ever since Judges, they have been in constant war, with Israel. But at this point, Goliath, this big giant, says, no, let's not have a war. If you can select one person that can beat me, then we will serve you. But if I beat him, then you guys will have to, will have to serve us. But at this point, obviously, Israel did not have a warrior like that. So they were really struggling, and they were crying out for help. So David he would usually go to the army to bring some provisions for his brothers, because some of his brothers were in the army. He hears about this. He hears about the reward that would be given to the person that would kill Goliath. He talks to Saul about his experience, as a shepherd, how he would fight with bears and lions, etc. And he says he wants to fight Goliath. Saul tries to give him his armor. It's obviously too heavy for him, so he leaves it, and he ends up just going with a sling, his staff, and 5 rocks. It says, we hear that David then kills Goliath, and Israel, as a result, they defeat the Philistines. 1 Samuel 18, we hear about Jonathan, who is the son of Saul. We actually heard about yesterday as well. And there's a very close friendship that builds between Jonathan, the son of Saul, and David. David starts to fight more and more battles and becomes more popular, obviously, because God is with him, and everywhere that he's going, he's actually winning these wars. Saul tries to kill David twice, but he fails, so he makes him a commander of his army instead, hoping that maybe one of these days, whilst he's at war, he would actually die. Saul offers his daughters. The first one, something happens there, and David doesn't end up marrying her, but he offers the second one, to her. But he says he would have to do something very, very dangerous to prove that he could actually afford to marry Saul's wife. But David manages to do that anyway, and Michal becomes David's wife. Saul at this point obviously is not happy with David, and he actually becomes David's enemy. We also hear about continued success for David in everything that he was doing. 1 Samuel 19, this is probably the theme of today's reading, where Saul is continually trying to kill David as his proper enemy. So Saul continues to try and kill David, but sometimes Jonathan would speak to him. Sometimes, David would get help from elsewhere. Saul again tries to kill David, but David flees this time to Samuel. Saul sends people to get David wherever Samuel was, but they get caught up in the presence of God and they start prophesying instead of actually going to capture David. Saul sends another troop. The same thing happens again, and Saul himself ends up going to try and get David from wherever Samuel was, and he starts to to prophesy as well. 1 Samuel 20, Saul continues to try and kill David, but David has an inside man at this point who is Jonathan, who is telling him where to go and how to do things so that he wouldn't get captured. There's now a covenant that is between David and Jonathan, and an agreement, a promise, a trust, a bond of what they would do for each other's families. Saul's intentions to kill David become even more clear at the feast, where he almost kills Jonathan, because Jonathan obviously knows at this point that Jonathan is protecting David. Saul is obviously displeased with Jonathan, and Jonathan communicates to David, and David then goes away. 1 Samuel 21, David goes to a priest called Ahimelech in a different city called Nob, and he gives him food and Goliath's sword, because that's where it had been stored after David had killed Goliath. From here, he goes to the Philistines' territory, but then they actually recognize him, and in order to actually escape, he pretends to be a mad guy. 1 Samuel 22, David leaves his parents in Moab, and people start to join David from different walks of life, different men here and there, beginning to join David's, you can call it army at this point, but there was a bunch of people that were gathering, to be with David. Saul's search, 1 Samuel 22, Saul's search for David continues, and he gets a guy called Doeg to kill Ahimelech, the guy who had helped David out, and all the other priests that were in Nob. One priest though called Abiathar, he manages to escape. 1 Samuel 23, David saves a tribe called Keilah from the Philistines. Saul's search continues again, but David is always helped by continually asking God where to go, how to go, and and what to do. Saul almost finds David, but he's distracted by another war that he actually has to attend to. 1 Samuel 24, Saul is chasing after David again, but David this time was hiding. David manages to cut a piece of Saul's cloak, and David actually shows Saul that he could have easily killed him, but he respected him as king, and he wouldn't do it. So Saul is amazed at the fact that somebody almost killed him, i.e. David, but he didn't, and he asked David to make him a promise, and then he goes on. 1 Samuel 25, we hear the story of David and Nabal, after Nabal refused to give him and his army some food, even though David and his army used to protect Nabal and his sheep, his shepherds. He would protect them for free, but Nabal just kind of turns around and shows contempt at that, and there's a problem. David actually obviously at this point wants to kill Nabal for what he's done. Nabal's wife Abigail picks up on this and stops the possible murder, and David is actually very impressed with Nabal's wife at this point. We then hear obviously about David taking extra wife. He also takes Abigail as his wife after Nabal dies. In 1 Samuel 25 as well, that's where we hear about the death of Samuel. 1 Samuel 26, Saul is chasing after David again. So every time, although he would promise, I'm not going to do it, he would continue to chase after David and try and kill him. David is again another chance, but he only takes his spear and a water jar. Then he tells Saul again. Saul then returns home at this point. 1 Samuel 27, David flees to Philistine land, hoping that maybe Saul would stop chasing after him, and he's given Ziklag to actually, to stay there. He was hoping, as it says, Saul would not find him, there, and he would then raid neighboring countries and lie that he was actually raiding other areas, just to kind of get in good books with the Philistines. 1 Samuel 28, which is today's last chapter, the Philistines, they make war again. But Saul at this point, because Samuel is dead, he had no one to ask for guidance as to how to go about this war, and God was not answering Saul's prayers at this point. So Saul is desperate, and he consults a medium, something that was not supposed to be done in Israel, and Saul himself had actually cleared out all the mediums in Israel, so he has to go there in disguise. But obviously he's found out that it was him trying to use this medium. But anyway, through this medium, Samuel actually comes back, apparently from the dead, and tells Saul that he would die the following day, and the kingdom would be taken away from him and would be given to somebody else. And obviously Saul has a really hard time, processing this information, knowing that he's about to die, knowing the kingdom will be taken away from him, and dying with this kind of legacy that he would, that would leave. So that's where we pick up from tomorrow. Then we get into 2 Samuel, where really it starts to talk more about the kingship of David and how David becomes the king, of Israel. And I think a lot of chunks from here on, we'll concentrate on David for a little while before we move on to the other kings. So hopefully that's helpful. I will see you guys tomorrow.